I want to welcome everyone to today's committee hearing. It is Wednesday, February the 13th. You have approximately 24 hours to do whatever it is you need to do before Valentine's Day. I don't want to.
Thank you for the reminder.
I don't want to. Hey, I'm cool. I did mine last week. I don't want to come here and see people with black eyes or crying in their beers. Okay, we have several items that I believe that we can rattle off quickly, and then we have a special item and a presentation. So with that said, I think we'll get started. I'm joined this morning by Council President Eric Garcetti and my dear friend Jan Perry. We have a quorum, so let's go. Ms. Barclay, let's try to go through items 1 through 6, and we'll begin with item 1.
Yes, sir. Meg Barclay with the CLA. Item 1 is Community Redevelopment Agency and Chief Legislative Analyst reports relative to environmental actions and an owner participation agreement with the Port of Los Angeles for the development of a police headquarters in the Beacon Street redevelopment project area.
Okay, without objections, we will adopt the CLA report. We've just been joined by my wingman, Mr. Ed Reyes. Ms. Barclay, if you could read item number 2.
Item 2 are reports from the CRA and CLA and a resolution relative to loan agreements with the East LA Community Corporation for $2 million for the development of the Las Margaritas multifamily rental housing project.
Okay, then without objection, we'll adopt the CLA report. Before we go to item 3, I want to check with the city attorney and make sure that he's properly dressed this committee. And he is properly dressed, so we can proceed. Item 3.
Item 3 is a CRA report and a report from the city administrative officer relative to the issuance and sale of multifamily senior housing revenue refunding bonds for the Angeles Plaza project.
Okay, then we will adopt the CAO's report. Item 4.
Item 4 is a report from the CRA and and there's also a CLA report on file relative to a TEFRA resolution for the issuance of up to $3.5 million of multifamily housing revenue bonds.
Okay, then we will adopt on the CLA report. Item 5.
Item 5 is a CRA, excuse me, CRA report, and a CAO report is also on file relative to a permanent loan agreement with 7 Maples LP for the development of the 7 Maples Senior Apartments project.
Okay, then we'll adopt the CAO report on that item. Item 6.
Item 6 is a motion, Reyes Garcetti, relative to purchasing Los Angeles County tax defaulted property. This motion should be received and filed.
Okay, then on item 6, we will receive and file this motion. And just for the record, without objection, the above items or the items we discussed earlier would be deemed approved. At this point, I think we want to adjourn for a moment and go into the special agenda. Or do, Mr. City Attorney, do I need to take testimony first, or?
You mean on the item on the special agenda?
Oh, well, somebody just whispered in my ear that I can come back to it. But you know what I want to do before we go to that special item? Let me bring up Chuck Tennant for public comment. Chuck?
Good morning, committee members. Chuck Tennant. An African proverb said it takes a village to raise a child. An American proverb, it takes a city to raise its people. So I'm asking the Housing Committee, what do you plan to do about the future of the housing problem in this city? The long-range negative effects that it will have on the people that need a place to live. Sit back and wham, it fixes itself, or trim some fat in the places that don't need it and try to put the federal monies and the taxpayers' monies to good use that can keep this city healthy and help the programs and help the people in this city that need your help. Proposition S was passed to cover the police and the firemen. Millions of dollars in additional revenue to make payroll, and the city's still millions of dollars in debt. Propositions 94, 5, 6, and 7 will bring millions of dollars to the state. City council members and city employees got raises. But what about the growing housing problem in this city? Don't do anything, eliminate the programs, cut the LAHD personnel, take away their tools, and don't have an affordable housing department? $500 million shortcoming, that's what the mayor claims there'll be in the budget. And we still need more funding. Maybe people should pay more and get less, or people pay more and get some help. Perhaps to help the housing problem, we need a new low-income tax so we can support developers to build more housing that people can't afford to live in. How does the city of LA plan to help these people and keep city housing programs alive if the city of LA and the mayor plans to drastically cut the LAHD budget, lay off some of their people, eliminate their city housing programs, such as the down payment assistance program and rehab? You can't take away their tools to do their jobs and be an effective administrative force in housing problems in this city that has a major housing crisis that continues to get worse. And yet, the mayor cries the blues that the city is out of money. Find the money. Don't cry about what you can't do, but what you can do to get more money and spend it wisely and not recklessly. How about the low income and the middle class people in LA that
Chuck.
need a place to live?
Chuck,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you were on a roll, and it was riveting. You reminded me of Emilio for a while. So thank you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Before we move forward, Mr. City Attorney, I've been informed that there are some concerns where it relates to item 3, and we've taken action on it, but what we need to do is continue it, because, Ms. Barclay, why don't you, what's your fancy?
I believe there was a delay in completing the CAO report on that item. They need another week to work through some issues.
So we'd like to, reconsider it, and then...
Certainly, if the
So anyway,
members concur.
without objection, we'll reconsider that item, and then we'll continue it until we receive the other information that we need.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Mr. Chair, can I just raise one question?
Yes.
So the basis of the request for the continuance, which comes from whom or which department? CAO, and that's only because they haven't submitted a report on time?
That's my understanding. Now, what would you like for us to just let this go?
Well, I would be comfortable with that. I don't want to violate any procedure, but we had some initial concerns with the redevelopment agency diverting the money that was to be repaid back to Angeles Plaza, and that those issues have been resolved. And so, I'm always concerned that leaving things out there hanging, creates an opportunity for.
Okay, so Ms. CLA, give me other options and how we can move forward with this and then deal with the concerns that you might have.
Well, we could approve the CRA report today without a CAO report on file. I'm not familiar with the reasons for the delay in the CAO report at this time, what the...
Okay,
additional
then let's do this. Let's approve it, and then if, by the time it gets to council,
Okay.
we'll deal with it, okay?
Great.
Which is, in the future, which is the way I prefer to deal with these things.
All right,
Just
sir.
going on the record. Now, we have, Mr.
No, there's
President.
nobody here from the CAO? Is there?
I don't see the analyst here, no.
Okay, we're all right. We're rolling. Okay. Now, what we want to do, Mr. City Attorney, is deal with a special agenda item. I believe that it is a motion by Mr. Garcetti.
Yes, sir. Do you mean to-
Yes.
Excuse me.
Mr.
Item 1 is a motion, Garcetti Labange, relative to various actions, including the relocation and renovation of a historic home to continue the development of a new park on Fountain Avenue.
I would move the motion.
Mr. Reyes, second. Without objection, that'll be the order. Now, at this point, we want to return to the regular agenda and deal with item 7. I have representatives here from, Well, I don't have a card on you. I've got somebody else, Mr. Mike.
I was just going to do the intro.
You were going to do the intro? Before you do the intro, could you show Miss Perry the gift that you received for Valentine's Day, or did you already?
I already saw it, and I have suggested that, given the production cost of $1, that he sell it on the weekends for at least $5 to $6. It's an excellent profit margin, and I think it's very nice.
That was part of my Valentine's Day.
That was part of yours, okay.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Yeah. But, Mr. Chairman, this is basically part of the task force that was basically set up through this committee for purposes of developing local job hiring ordinance. And the task force has been meeting for basically 18 months. It includes not only the mayor's office, Council District 8 and 9, also, as well as your office, Mr. Chairman, but also includes the mayor's office, CDD, the city attorney's office, and contract administration. And as we reviewed the process for developing the ordinance and reviewed how other cities' ordinances were functioning and not functioning, and which ones were basically able to withstand a court challenge, it was important that we conducted a study that would show the reasons why we, as a city, need to have a local hiring ordinance so that we could justify the need to do that. And CDD contracted with the Economic Roundtable. Before you have Dr. Daniel Fleming, as well as Michael Matsunuka, who is the researcher, and they have a presentation on that study. When they presented to the task force, we thought that the study was so important that the rest of us basically grasped it. And we wanted to make sure that the committee had a chance to see this study, and I'm real happy to see the members who are here today.
Okay, Mr. Hernandez, what about Mr. Rodriguez?
I think we're just going to submit that letter of support on behalf of Councilmember Parks.
Okay.
And I think
Okay.
Councilwoman Perry has a motion she'll be making to the committee after the presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us to be here. We have a brief presentation. There are handouts in front of you, and it will also be projected. I'm joining my colleague Michael Metz.
Wait a minute. Mr. Sergeant, how big is that screen? Given my age, I think I'll use the handout.
And Mr. Chair, I was just got corrected by the city attorney's office. This is a draft of the study, not the final form.
Okay. Go on, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm joining my colleague Michael Matsunaga, who is the author of this study, and we're going to cover 5 things quickly this morning. We're going to look at poverty trends nationally, regionally, in Los Angeles. We're going to look at concentrated poverty in Los Angeles, the characteristics of people who live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, indices of well-being in those neighborhoods, and finally labor flows in the construction industry. And we'll divide the presentation between us. So when we look at this, look at poverty nationally, when we look at the nation from 1990 to 2000, concentrated poverty decreased by 25%, and it declined among all ethnic groups that had lived in concentrated poverty. Next, please. But when we look at the 5-county Los Angeles region, we had a trend that was the opposite. We had a marked growth of concentrated poverty. About 2% of tracts, census tracts were marked by concentrated poverty in 1970, 1980. This grew to 5% in 2000. The most severe cases of concentrated poverty are in the urban core of cities. Contributing factors include immigration, industrial restructuring, changes in the regional and global economy, recessions, and civil unrest. This graph we've just projected shows a 27-year history of poverty levels in Los Angeles City, Los Angeles County, California, and the United States. And throughout this period, the city of Los Angeles has had a rate of poverty that's been 40% or higher than the national rate, and consistently above the county and the state of California. This is a map it's a census tract map that's color coded to show the intensity of poverty in census tracts. The brightest red census tracts are areas where 40% or more of the households are in poverty. And this is a typical benchmark in academic studies.
Is that UCLA on the west side?
Yes, that's student poverty. Yes, sir. So that's one of the more benign forms of poverty, but it's always interesting to see that. You're absolutely right. You're dead on with that.
Probably Lincoln Heights, right?
Altogether, 19% of households in the city of Los Angeles were in poverty at the time of the 2000 census. And in the next slide, we talk about the process we use to define neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. So we have poverty spread throughout the city, often in a diffuse form where it's a sprinkling of households. But there is an academic study that says that when neighborhoods have high levels of concentrated poverty, there are disproportionate impacts. When lots and lots of very poor people become the defining demographic of census tracts, there are problems that increase exponentially. So we defined a portion of the poverty population in Los Angeles, and that is those neighborhoods that where 40% or more of households in broad neighborhoods are below the poverty threshold. One of our guidelines for doing this was to identify neighborhoods you could actually find if you went out and looked for them. So not simply a census tract, but an area that was defined by major traffic arteries and neighborhood identity. And we identified 9 neighborhoods that meet these characteristics in the city of Los Angeles, and broadly speaking, they extend from either side of downtown through South Los Angeles. There's a corridor of neighborhoods that meet this criteria of being sort of identifiable, big enough to readily go out and find, and neighborhoods where 40% or more of households are in poverty. So this is not the total picture of poverty in Los Angeles, it's the picture of neighborhoods where poverty is most extreme and most concentrated. These concentrated poverty neighborhoods account for 87% of the city's census tracts in concentrated poverty, 22% of households in poverty, so there are quite a few folks in poverty outside of these neighborhoods. 14% of all of the census tracts in the city, and 13% of the city's total population. And so with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague to describe the characteristics of residents in concentrated poverty neighborhoods.
Thank you.
So we took these 9 areas and we created a basic demographic profile of the area, and we compared them to the city of LA. In the left column, you're going to see of the chart is the city of LA, and the one right next to it on the right is an aggregate of all 9 areas. Generally, we're seeing an overrepresentation of Latinos and blacks in the CPNs. The Latino and black population is about 91% of our concentrated poverty neighborhoods. In the city, it's about 57% of the population. We're also finding that Latinos are about 13 times, blacks are 12 times, and Asians are 4 times more likely than whites to live in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods. About half of our residents in the CPNs are foreign-born. In the city, it's about 41%. If we were just to look at the foreign-born population, about 82% of the foreign-born population in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods are non-citizens, and this is compared to 66% in the city. We're seeing language barriers. Language barriers are apparent in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods. There are twice as many linguistically...
Can I ask you one thing about that? Is that from census data, so it's capturing legal non-citizens? Or is it some sort of methodology that captures non-legal citizens?
No, this is
non-legal residents.
This is from Census 2000.
Okay, but does that capture undocumented folks?
It captures undocumented as well as documented.
They are probably undersampled in the census when you
Right.
consider transitory folks who maybe are overcrowded and maybe reluctant to make contact with public officials, but they are part of the sampling frame.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No, but since, I have a quick question, too. This is based on data collected 2000. Do you make projections as to how you think this may have changed now that it's 2008, or? How accurate is accurate? Or,
It's the latest, it's the most recent data for which we have these fine-grained geographic areas. The data that we have that's more recent covers population areas of about 150,000. They're called public use microdata areas. So it's possible to look at data more recent, but it's not really fine-grained enough to define these neighborhoods where 40% of folks are in poverty. And in general, poverty tracks unemployment and the recession. So the overall trends we see for the city, where poverty is about the same now as it was in 2000. The overall level is probably the same. The neighborhoods may have shifted some.
okay.
Mr. Chair, I do have one question.
Mr. Reyes?
The notion of undercount, is there a number or a percentage that is recognized by the professionals as to what we missed? Is there a guesstimation given what we pay into the coffers versus what is not being absorbed because of their condition?
I don't have that off the top of my head. We've actually looked at that a little bit. I can't pull a number up. We've done studies of the informal economy and made an estimate of undercounts of residents working in the underground economy, and I just can't give it to you off the top of my head. There is definitely, in the census data, when you consider the sampling frame, that they start with identifiable addresses and then survey the people living at those addresses. When you consider folks working at a car wash, 6 guys renting an apartment, sleeping on the floor, maybe people moving in and out. It's not the easiest population in the world
Right.
to survey, so there's inevitably an undercount in it.
But just from a policy development point of view, we need to understand what's going to work and what isn't.
Yes.
If we continuously miss the target, then the fruits of our labor will be hard to see because we're doing enough to fail and not to address the issue. So I just thought that was a number that we should be aware of. Maybe in the future we can get that.
I would be pleased to send you, we do have some estimates of that, and I'd be pleased to send that to your staff or to you if that was helpful.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
We've just been joined by Mr. Tony Cardenas, and you can continue.
Great. There are twice as many linguistically isolated households and CPNs than in the city. About 36% of the households in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods are linguistically isolated, and it's about 18% in the city. The majority of these households are Spanish-speaking households. The next slide, we wanted to take a look at the distribution of the working age population, and this was defined as between the ages of 16 and 64. Generally, we were seeing that the working age population in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods are comparable to what's in the city. About 63% of the working age of the population in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods are of working age. However, we're seeing that the poverty neighborhoods have a larger portion of younger children and a smaller portion of seniors in those areas. Despite having comparable working age residents, we're seeing that residents of concentrated poverty neighborhoods are employed at a lower rate, and they're also not in the labor force. About 55% of the city's residents are employed, compared to 43% in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods. 40% of the city's working force, or the working age residents, are not in the labor force, but it's close to 50% in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods. We also looked at well-being indices for the concentrated poverty neighborhoods, and we looked at 7 indices. We looked at housing security, immobility, education deficits, school performance, adults at risk, maternal health outcomes, and public safety. Overall, when we look at all these conditions combined, we're seeing that the concentrated poverty neighborhoods were about 63% worse than the city as a whole. The conditions in CPNs were characterized by overcrowded living conditions. Renter-occupied units were about 71% more crowded in CPNs than in the city overall. Residents were considerably less mobile. About 2.5 times, residents of CPNs were 2.5 times more likely to not have a private vehicle. We're seeing lower levels of education attainment. Adults in CPNs are twice as likely to not have a high school diploma. About 66% of the adult population in our concentrated poverty neighborhoods do not have a high school education. Children are generally performing more poorly than the LAUSD average. Young adults were less likely to be enrolled in school, and about half of these adults not enrolled in school are also not in the labor force, and these are the population between 16 and 19 years old. We're seeing higher rates of births to young mothers and higher rates of complicated births to mothers in these areas, and they're also exposed to a greater amount of crime. The last step, they asked us to look at the construction worker flows coming in and out of LA County. In 2000, about 5% of the employed residents in the city and 7% of the employed residents in our CPNs had jobs in the construction industry. Construction employment in the city was lagging a little bit behind the state and the nation, mostly probably because of the built-out nature of LA. If we were to look at the CPNs, construction employment in the concentrated poverty neighborhoods is equal to or greater than the city, the county, the state, and the nation, meaning that there's a large labor force with skills for the construction industry. Lastly, we're looking at the construction worker flows in and out of LA County. We're using 2006 data, and this is census data. In the end, we're seeing that LA is generally importing, a net importer of construction workers by a margin of 3,000 workers. This is saying that the economic benefits from a loss of about 3,000 jobs are leaving the county, while close to 20,000 construction workers that live in the city of, or in the county of LA remain unemployed.
So to summarize the points we've made in the presentation, concentrated poverty is clustered in a corridor that extends from the downtown area through South Los Angeles. 8% of tracts in the city have concentrated levels of poverty, and these tracts are home to 15% of the city's households in poverty. Residents in these concentrated poverty neighborhoods are disproportionately Latino and Black, largely foreign-born, face language barriers, and are more likely to be out of the labor force. And residents of these neighborhoods are 63% more adversely impacted than the city residents as a whole in terms of housing insecurity, school performance, public safety, immobility, young adults at risk, educational attainment, maternal health outcomes. The LA County is losing the economic benefits of 3,000 construction jobs that are filled by folks coming in from outside LA, and there is a strong labor force base in concentrated poverty neighborhoods for filling construction jobs. So thank you very much for letting us make this presentation. If there are any questions, we'll be pleased to answer them.
Thank you. I think Ms. Perry may want to have a...
Yeah, I did want to make a couple of comments. I ran the census for the city in the year 2000, and this report and the questions from the committee members just highlight the importance of making sure that we have a really comprehensive census count for 2010, and I know that HCED committee has this as a mandate. City attorneys here at the table. I wanted to first thank the Economic Roundtable for this very compelling, statistically very sound report. And it's not only thought-provoking, but it just cuts right to the chase about the things that we knew, but it gives us some meat to wrap on the bones, and confirms the problems that we've been working in my district, Mr. Reyes, Mr. Weston, and all the other members of the committee for years. The report did a good job at making the necessary findings to help us establish an ordinance to require the hiring of City of Los Angeles residents on city-funded public works projects. That's something that we haven't done before, and it's hard for me to even imagine that we haven't had something in place like this already, but I'm happy that we're joining together with Mr. Reyes and his ordinance that he authored regarding first source hiring for city jobs. Third, I wanted to say something about the task force that's represented here and has been working on this matter for well over a year. Everyone from the mayor's office to CDD to the Bureau of Contract Administration, CLA, CAO, they've all been an enormous help. And what I'd like to do is just make a motion that asks the CLA and the city attorney to report back to this committee in 30 days with a draft ordinance. And I would like the city attorney and the CLA, these two departments, to coordinate and report back to us not only with a draft ordinance, but with some recommendations on what public works projects, and with respect to a threshold amount for this ordinance, would be applicable. In other words, give us a threshold on which this ordinance should apply and make some recommendations regarding the monitoring and the enforcement of the ordinance. Additionally, many of our larger city projects, like the police headquarters across the street, operate under a project labor agreement which had included in it local hire goals. We need local hire standards set in our ordinance, so when a project is operating under a PLA, it can be considered in compliance with our local hire ordinance. And I think that's basically all I had to say right now, Mr. Chair, and I can...
Now, Mr. City Attorney, can we move forward on that request?
Yes, certainly. That's simply a motion to put something on the
second that.
agenda for
Okay,
future.
Mr. Reyes is second, and
Mr. Reyes.
I think, Mr. Reyes?
Yes, if I may. There's a couple of directions I can hope, Mr. Chair, we might consider. I know we haven't spoken to this, but I would like to hear from the mayor's office what their role has been in addressing these conditions, just from a broad perspective, so we can get the umbrella, the comprehensive nature of what they've been doing in relation to the first source hiring, and other efforts that are being made by the port, by the airport, and understanding that Department of Water and Power has a significant role in this too. If there is just a broad brush, just an overview of how these issues are being addressed from those particular entities, because we tend to be sitting on islands and everyone has their own approach. 2 years ago, I asked for the analysis of how the different departments are looking at their contracts that they are doling out, and to understand how much of it actually comes back. And so this is important too, because it sets the legal basis for that. But now we can hopefully stand on firmer ground based on this information and move the policy in that direction. So I've been very hesitant because I want to be methodical about how we approach this, because I think we have one good shot at this. And so I applaud you and members of this committee, and thank you, Councilmember Perry, for the tenacity of keeping that focus. But I think we should start at least understanding what those bridges could look like, and just give us a sketch, nothing very thorough, but just understand what direction they're taking these different entities.
Well, you know what, Mr. Reyes, maybe what we could do quickly is have our two staffs have a quick discussion, and then let's come up with a way to quickly get some response, because I agree with you. Let's just figure out the quickest and the most effective way for us to move forward.
Yes, and one more point. In the area of environment, in terms of trash and debris and our ability for the city to service the densities and the conditions of this location, I know it's a very dicey and sensitive issue. But when we talk about economic development and jobs and healthy environments, and we maintain the policies that limits our ability to clean our streets, to clean the gutters, to maintain our sidewalks. It has a direct impact on desirability, not only in investment, but how we treat our neighborhoods. I believe the formulas we have are the same formulas we had back in the 1940s and 50s. And we haven't addressed the issue of the concentration of people. I think this study magnifies the fact that we need to address that if we're truly going to stimulate new environments for investment and look at the notion of environmental impacts. The trash concentration, I know it almost by heart. I can tell you that the trash areas that are contaminating not only our rivers and our oceans are coming from the very same pockets. And there's a reason for it, and I don't think it's because there's blacks and Latinos living there. I think it's because this city and its institutions have yet to prioritize that condition, given the formulas we use today. And that's just something I want to put on the table as well, and for the record.
Thank you. Mr. Cardenas.
I have a question. Is the Economic Roundtable aware or looked at the document and the effort that's going on with the CRA when they're looking at local hiring and putting forth something that the CRA board's going to be voting on and putting to the council?
We've just heard about it in passing. We haven't studied it, but we're aware that that's occurring.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because it sounds like, although this is the broader entire city dialogue in your report about hiring locally and poverty and how to address it with jobs and things of that nature, and what kind of policy can the city implement to not only encourage but to enforce that those opportunities will be provided for our Angelenos, certainly in Angelenos who live in poverty and deserve an opportunity to have a job should they want to take one. But the CRA is doing it in the more concentrated area in their purview in the CRA areas. But coincidentally, looking at the colored maps and the overlays that you have here, they're following the same census tracts or zip codes or what have you that you're actually finding that have the greatest poverty and the greatest need for these kinds of opportunities. So I think it would really help the Economic Roundtable, and I think it would also help the CRA for you to at least dialogue with each other and share what your findings are and where you're at, because I think you're culminating in the same direction and with a lot of the same information at about the same time.
We'd be very pleased to do that, particularly if you have some guidance about who to talk to, or we know people there, but we'd be very pleased to do that.
It's my understanding that Cecilia Estelano is personally involved in this. That's how big of an issue it is for CRA. So she heads the CRA, and that would be the person you'd want to contact.
You know what, Mr. Cardenas, just to make sure, can this committee direct the head of the CRA to engage in a discussion?
Well, I think the appropriate action would be to request it, since they're not a city department.
I really don't like the request, but we will request because I think she'll do it. But why don't we, as a committee, make that request, and then it'll be easier for us to follow up on it. So
Thank
back
you.
to you.
And the thing is, but what I don't want to do is I want to make sure that dialogue occurs, because I think you're gonna complement each other's and fortify each other's final reports. But what I don't want to do is somehow create something that's going to slow either one of them down. They have their own energy, their own synergy, but I think that there's a lot of information that are involved in both that would complement each other. And I think it would just make a better report on both parts. So, but the main thing is, I guess, as the chair stated, that requested that the roundtable meet with the CRA and specifically talk to Cecilia Estelano, because I know for a fact she's personally involved and she's at the highest level there. So if that dialogue could take place before the final report of the roundtable, that'd be great.
And let's have the CLA's office with the mayor's office initiate that come together meeting. Mr. Garcetti?
Thank you. Just three quick questions from the study. Do you know what percentage of construction jobs that you found are union? Were you able to put anything allocated together?
You know, it's, we actually did something on that lately, and I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head. We could get that to you, I just don't remember.
Sure.
It's very small. Let me say it's very small, but the exact percent I'd have
Like
to...
low double digits, probably, something like that?
Low double digits.
Okay. What was the other city where poverty grew in the 90s? The two metropolitan areas? Do you know what the other one was?
I believe it was DC.
DC. And did you look at the racial breakdown of the concentrated poverty areas, construction workers at all? I mean, because one of the things that's been raised, I mean, it's interesting to see that in these areas we actually have a higher percentage of residents in the construction industry, because a lot of the conventional wisdom is we're not hiring locally. One thing I have heard quite a bit about is that, well, you go to some of these job sites and it's disproportionately one way or the other. And I know that the CRA, for instance, local hiring, has also been looking at specifically trying to boost African American numbers vis-a-vis Latino numbers and others. Is that something that you broke down at all in this, or were able to assess?
For another piece of work we did, we looked a little bit at wage trends in the construction industry, and what we found is very high levels of informal employment and a dual wage structure with lower wages for immigrants. So it suggests a need to bring more of those jobs, first of all, into the mainstream economy, and secondly, into a framework of living wages. We looked a bit at characteristics of construction workers for a piece of this study that wasn't part of this presentation today, and found that a fair number of these folks have limited levels of education and also sometimes limited English ability. So it suggests that to bring many of these workers in concentrated poverty neighborhoods into mainstream jobs with mainstream employers, folks are going to need some training as well as a job opening.
But we weren't able to look at, for instance, if you're African American, when these high poverty areas, what percentage of the African American population is in construction jobs versus Latino population?
We could take a stab at that for you, but we don't have it at our fingertips. It wouldn't be hard to do, and it wouldn't be hard to send.
If you don't mind, it'd be interesting, because a lot of the public policy debate, is targeted in a positive way, not in a way of turning one group against another, but just of trying to incorporate that growing construction area and making sure it's touching all communities.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Perry.
One suggestion I have is it's a group that I enjoy working with because they are very sensitive to the racial and ethnic balance on job sites, and that's Job Corps. And you might want to contact Faye Washington because I've been asking her on some of the projects that are coming forward in my district to ask the developers to sign agreements with Job Corps to be their job readiness, job placement nonprofit partner, and they're way ahead of the curve. Way ahead of the curve and other nonprofits on compiling those statistics and making sure that they deliver on the site itself.
Good, thank you. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Franks, since you demonstrated your strength in carrying your own chair up to the dais here, I'm assuming that you might have something to say. Now, normally, we only let people speak that sit in our official chairs, but since you are Deputy Mayor, we will afford you that courtesy.
Yeah.
Thanks to Mr. Reyes. I didn't even see you come up.
Good morning, everybody. A couple of things that might be useful. I want to first respond to Councilmember Cardenas that there is a conversation started. The request was to CRA to actually approach the Economic Roundtable to ask if they would be willing to present some version of this to the February 21st CRA meeting.
You hear that, Mr. Cardenas? Mr. Cardenas,
Yeah.
there's already been what you and I didn't know, a request by the
Mayor's office to the CRA to make sure that this work, which I think underpins both the city's local hire strategy, it absolutely would help legally to underpin the CRA's local hire strategy. You're absolutely on point. And I guess it hasn't happened yet, but we will take responsibility, as will CLA, to make sure that the CRA does reach out to them and that this underpins the work.
What were you
CRA
saying
as
about
well.
the 23rd?
I think there's a CRA is having a hearing on this issue on 21st of February, is my understanding.
Something of this month.
Yeah.
May I ask a question of Mr. Chair?
Yes.
When you say, Larry, clarify for me, what do you mean underpin? Because I don't want to redirect what we've been working on for a year, nor do I wish to have the CRA come in and try to change it to the point that substantively takes it off point. So I mean, I think it's fine to do the presentation, but what do you mean underpin? What does that mean?
So maybe I should ask the city attorney to answer that question.
Please.
Legal underpinnings is what we were looking for. Originally, when we requested that you hire Roundtable to perform this study, it was to develop the legal underpinnings to
Yeah, that's
support
right, the next
the different
We
recommendations.
can sustain a challenge.
And as we began talking about it in the task force and realizing that similar things were going on at the CRA, it became clear that this might form legal underpinnings and support what they're doing also. And I don't think that it has to slow down.
I just don't want it to be in conflict. I mean, there's aspects of what the CRA does that often either circumvent what we're doing here or undermine what we're doing here. And if we set up, I just don't want to, after all this work that we've done here, I certainly don't want to set myself up to be like a bug on a windshield and then just, basically shoot the whole thing to hell and have to start all over again.
I'd be happy to have a sidebar about it if you want.
No, it's fine. We don't need to have a sidebar on it. I just don't want it to happen. That's all. It's fine. I need to say that because it happened with the industrial land use policy, and buried therein in the industrial land use policy is a CRA shopping list which hadn't been vetted by the public, and I don't want something like that to happen with this because we've all been working in concert together.
Right.
And I just don't want to circumvent what we've done. So I need to put that on the record because the whole focus of this has been to create the legal, the nexus, the legal basis, the rational basis, so that anybody ever challenged this, we would be able to sustain that challenge based on precedent from other jurisdictions throughout the country. I mean, that was my understanding of why we did this. So I just need to say that to you. And no, it's no sidebar. I mean, you know me, I say everything I need to say in public and on the record. It's just easier that way.
I can't envision you being a bug on a windshield.
It was a good visual, wasn't it? Yeah, it was good.
I can visualize you driving the car that hits the bug, and maybe I would be the bug. That I can picture.
I heard the splat. Okay.
Mr. Cardenas. Oh, no, wait. Mr. Franks wanted to respond, and then Mr. Cardenas. Go right ahead.
Well, the two other things that might be relevant to Council President Garcetti, there is work which I'd be happy to share with anybody who's interested. So UCLA has done a fair amount of work using Division of Apprenticeship standards to look at exactly who are the apprentices, and it's all broken down by ethnicity, by joint versus unilateral programs, and by trade. And we're actually doing a follow-up study after 2 years of work on it, going back at the exact same list of apprentices, so I can share that material with you. That would be helpful. And then the question about unionization, I think the fair kind of overview would tell you that it's broken into three areas. Heavy highway is probably about 95% union. Commercial is probably about 50% union. The prevailing wage side of commercial is probably about 60% to 65% union in the region, right? And then residential, that's where you get the low-wage industry. It's become a low-wage industry, and it's probably, I'd say, about 2 to 3%. But again, residential is different than commercial. Commercial would be anything in terms of high-rises, even though it is residential. So that would give you a kind of snapshot of what the field looks like.
Mr. Cardenas.
Yeah, I think I was pointing out what Jan Perry was pointing out, only she gave a specific example of maybe some history where things that may have gotten convoluted or what have you, or one report or one department infiltrated what else is going on in the city. But that's what I meant when I said I'd like those minds to come together, yet not slow down each of each other's efforts. But I think that inevitably, as was already noted, people started to realize that there's similar investment of information and study going on in the city with the CRA. And that's all I wanted to do, is make sure that you can know that, utilize it, but continue to move forward with each effort, because they are different and they are addressing similar issues, but they're doing it in a different way under different jurisdiction and responsibility.
Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Frank, I want to thank you for your support throughout the process when we started this dialogue with all the different entities, Water Power, Harbor, Airport. But as I was saying earlier, in discussing with the chair, perhaps we can have them come back in light of this information and talk about their progress. About a year and a half ago or two, they said they were going to start, or some have said we're doing this. And with your stewardship and those of others in the mayor's office, I would like to see what they've done just to keep them close to the fire as we move forward on this, in this process, so it doesn't get away from us. I think over time, it tends to slip into the public relations budget or slips into the good feeling community benefit package that doesn't have any real reflection of what's really there. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, and perhaps we can come up with a strategy. But that's something I'd like to suggest to you and get your impressions on that.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, there's local hire efforts that are at the airport that have mixed reviews right now, and there's a complex equation between the airport trying to take back contract oversight away from BCA. There's an interesting, you know, struggle happening on that front right now. At the port, there was the Port Police Headquarters attempt to do local hire and project labor agreement, which actually did not happen at the port. There is in DWP, there's no real PLA policy or efforts on DWP's front. You know, at Public Works, things are, thanks to your effort and leadership, things are moving forward with a sense of policy. At CRA, things are moving forward with a sense of policy. I think it would be totally appropriate for you to bring in those four entities and have a conversation. I think you'd learn a lot from that conversation about where this conversation
And what I find
is going.
And what I find compelling is that with the budget cuts that we're going to endure, seeing this transition that we're going through at the federal level, what happens this summer, we need to start preparing now. And so it gives us maybe 3 or 4 months, but we should be looking at this hot summer is going to come up. We don't have the city funds that we used to have. We don't see anything coming from the feds in the near future. And so we need to get creative and much more aggressive about what we have in-house. And so that's the umbilical cord I'm hoping we can establish between these entities and the pockets that we see in this map.
That's right.
And it's just something I think we need to progress towards. So I appreciate your support on that.
Okay, thank you all very much. Deputy Mayor, please return the chair.
So my motion?
Yeah.
My motion
Now,
is okay, Mr.
where
Chair?
where it relates to Ms. Perry's motion, you want to restate that? Is it, or was it basically, no. I was going to ask the city attorney, because we're going to roll with it, but was it directing the CLA and the CAO to come back in 30 days, or? I'm having a senior moment, so help me.
The CLA and the city attorney to come back
Okay, within 30 days.
in 30 days.
And also, if we'll ask the CLA to follow up on the questions of the committee members?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so without objection, that'll be the order. Is there any more business before this committee?
No, sir.
Then this committee is adjourned. Hey, I'm retired, Perry.
Come on.